I knew something was wrong the moment my grandson wrinkled his nose at the cake I'd carried all morning, like a fragile piece of my own heart. At 78, you learn to read silence better than words, and the silence that settled over my kitchen when they walked in wasn't the shy, warm kind I remembered from years ago. It was the cold kind, the kind that arrives when people show up because they feel they have to, not because they want to. And yet, foolish woman that I was, I still smoothed the tablecloth and smiled as if love could be willed back into existence. Robert sat down first, already checking his phone. Clara followed, sighing loudly as though visiting me was an interruption. And Evan, 19, broad-shouldered, impatient, didn't say hello, just glanced at the boxes on the counter. "Is that the cake?" he muttered, as if it offended him personally. I'd chosen it carefully, a vanilla sponge with cream and fresh berries, decorated with a small ring of sugar violets, the kind my husband used to buy for me on special occasions. I suppose I'd hoped it would feel like he was here with us somehow. I placed the cake on the table. "I thought we might have a little celebration," I said lightly. "Nothing fancy." Evan snorted. "Looks cheap." Cheap. The thing had cost more than what I used to spend on groceries for a week. I didn't react. At my age, you learn that reacting only gives people something to push against. But inside, a small thread loosened. We sat, or rather, they sat, cold, distant, speaking more to each other than to me. I cut the cake myself. No one offered to help. Robert accepted his slice only to set it aside without tasting it. Clara picked at hers like it might stain her perfect teeth. Evan didn't touch his at all. "Do you want a different dessert?" I asked gently. "No," he said flatly. "I just don't eat stuff like this." He used to. When he was little, he'd lick the frosting off the candles, giggling until his face was sticky. I used to wipe him clean with the corner of my apron, and he'd lean into me as though I were the safest place on earth. Strange how children forget safety the moment they learn the world offers more glamorous places to stand. We made our way through a conversation that wasn't a conversation. It was a performance. They asked about my health with the same tone one uses when asking about the weather. They told me they couldn't stay long. They didn't ask how I'd spent the morning or whether I'd been lonely. I wasn't expecting tenderness, but I suppose I had hoped for something. When it was time to clear the table, Evan stood first. "This is pointless," he muttered, not quietly enough. He picked up his untouched cake and held it with two stiff fingers. "Why did you even buy this? Nobody wants it." "I thought it would be nice for my birthday," I said softly. He rolled his eyes, walked to the trash bin, flipped open the lid with his elbow, and let the slice fall in. Not just the slice, the plate, the fork, everything. The hollow thud of porcelain hitting garbage felt like a slap I didn't deserve. Robert didn't scold him. Clara didn't gasp. They both looked away, as if the scene were mildly embarrassing, but not truly wrong. I stood very still. At my age, stillness is sometimes the only way to keep yourself from breaking. "Evan," Robert said finally, but his voice was thin, weak, a formality. "Don't be rude. It's just cake." Evan shrugged. "Just cake. Just a birthday. Just a grandmother. Just a woman whose hands had sewn his Halloween costumes, whose savings had paid half his tuition last fall, whose door had never once been closed to him." I felt something inside me shift, the way a beam shifts before a roof collapses. Not anger. No, anger burns too hot for women my age. It was something quieter, a realization long overdue. a knowledge that all the years of giving had turned me invisible to the very people I'd carried through life. "Maybe we should go," Clara said, already gathering her purse. They left within minutes. No hugs, no thank you, no happy birthday, unless one counts the careless phrase Robert tossed over his shoulder while stepping out the door. The house was silent when it closed behind them. I stood by the sink, looking at the small smear of frosting on the counter, the one I'd missed earlier. It looked strangely bright in the late afternoon light, like a remnant of some celebration that never really happened. I thought of the slice of cake sitting in the trash, buried beneath crumpled napkins. Then I looked at the empty table, the 3 chairs pulled back at careless angles, the faint warmth still lingering in the room from their brief visit. And for the first time in a long, long while, I felt the weight of my age settle on my shoulders, not like a burden, but like a truth I'd been refusing to face. The morning after my birthday felt strangely quiet, as if the house itself were trying not to disturb me. I woke before dawn, as I always do, but instead of getting up right away, I stayed in bed listening to the soft hum of the radiator and the old pipes settling in the walls. At 78, a woman learns to take comfort in small, steady sounds. They don't lie to you. They don't change their mind about loving you. I lay there longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, letting the memory of yesterday land on me slowly, piece by painful piece. Evan's hand dropping that plate into the trash. The dull thud. Clara averting her eyes. Robert pretending he didn't notice. I'd lived a whole life raising a boy into a man, then helping him raise a family of his own. And yet yesterday, I might as well have been a stranger they'd stopped to visit out of obligation. Eventually, I forced myself up. My bones protested with their usual stiffness. Nothing new. But today it felt heavier, as if the ache came from somewhere deeper than joints. I shuffled into the kitchen, put on the kettle, and sat down at the table. The chair was still slightly pulled back from where Evan had sat. I stared at that empty space for a long moment, then gently pushed the chair in, as if tidying away something I didn't want to look at anymore. The remaining cake sat on the counter under its plastic dome. It looked almost cheerful with its bright berries and delicate violets, like a face trying to smile. I opened the lid and cut myself a small slice. Just a thin one. I ate it slowly with my tea, not because it tasted especially good, but because it tasted honest. I needed something honest after yesterday. Every bite brought up memories I had spent years pushing aside. How many times had I stepped in to help Robert when he was too proud to ask directly? When he and Clara were just starting out, I'd quietly slipped money into envelopes, told them it was extra pension or some refund the bank finally processed so they wouldn't feel embarrassed. When Evan was a baby, I used to drive across town 3 times a week so Clara could have a break. When their roof leaked, I paid the contractor. When Robert lost his job for a few months, I covered the mortgage so they wouldn't lose the house. I never complained, never expected gratitude. Love, I thought then, was something you showed, not something you were paid back for. And yet, looking back now, those gestures of love had turned into expectations, obligations, and then, without my noticing, into a habit of being taken for granted. I finished my tea, washed the cup, and reached for the little notebook I keep under the phone. It's where I jot down reminders, appointments, grocery lists, the dates of my blood pressure checks. My eyes drifted to a page from a few months ago. Transfer to Robert. College fees for Evan. I remembered writing it quickly, not even thinking about the amount, just doing what needed to be done. Now I looked at that line and felt something cold settle inside me. That yesterday, the boy whose education I helped pay for had thrown my birthday cake into the trash like it was garbage. Like I was. I put the notebook back, but didn't close it. Instead, I laid my hand on its cover, steadying myself. It wasn't anger I felt, it was recognition. A quiet, painful recognition that something had been wrong between us for a long time, and I had simply refused to see it because it was easier to pretend that love doesn't fade when you're kind enough. Around mid-morning, my phone buzzed. A message from Robert. Mom, about yesterday. Evan was tired and didn't mean anything by it. Let's not make a big deal of things. Call when you're feeling better. A big deal. My birthday. Dismissed in 3 words. I didn't reply. Not yet. I set the phone face down on the table and let the silence settle again. After lunch, I went outside to water the flowers on the porch. The air was crisp, the kind of cool that reminds you winter isn't far. My neighbor, Mrs. Hill, walked by with her dog and waved. Morning, Margaret. How was your birthday? She asked cheerfully. I felt a pinch in my chest, but kept my voice even. Quiet, I said. Just a small gathering. Well, that's lovely, she smiled before moving on. When she was gone, I looked at my hands gripping the watering can. They were trembling just a little. I wasn't ashamed of what had happened yesterday. I was ashamed that I had allowed myself to pretend for so many years that everything was fine. That love hides in the corners if you just stay patient enough. I went back inside and sat in my armchair. The afternoon light drifted in gently, warming the floorboards. It was the kind of light I used to love reading by, but today I didn't read. I simply sat there, thinking, and feeling the first threads of a decision forming, soft but steady. Something had to change. Not in them. They were who they were. Something had to change in me. I didn't know yet what shape that change would take, but I knew this much. Yesterday was not going to be forgotten, brushed aside, or explained away. Not this time. For once in my long, tired life, I felt the faintest spark of something like resolve, and I let it stay. Robert called in the early afternoon, just as I'd settled down with a cup of chamomile tea. My phone lit up with his name, and for a moment I considered letting it ring. 78 years of motherhood had conditioned me to answer every call from my son, no matter how tired or hurt I felt. But yesterday had left a bruise somewhere deep, and I wasn't sure I could hide it in my voice. Still, old habits are stubborn companions. I picked up. Mom, he said without greeting, his tone clipped in that way he uses when he wants to sound reasonable and in control. I didn't want to text again. We need to talk about yesterday. I took a slow breath. All right, I said. He cleared his throat. Evan feels terrible. He told me this morning he didn't mean anything by throwing the cake out. He was just frustrated. I closed my eyes. Frustrated. The words sat like a stone in my stomach. Frustrated with what? I asked quietly. You know how he gets, Robert said. He's under a lot of pressure right now. Classes, his internship, everything. He paused as if waiting for me to sympathize. He didn't mean to hurt your feelings. I looked at the sunlight shifting across my living room floor, the gentle brightness that had felt comforting earlier. Now, it only made me tired. Robert, I said, keeping my voice calm. He didn't hurt my feelings. Silence at the other end. Then what's the problem? I let out a slow breath. It wasn't about feelings. It was about respect. He sighed loudly, the way people do when they think the other person is being dramatic. Mom, it was just cake. No, I said softly. It wasn't. He was silent again before speaking more briskly. Look, I don't want this to become a bigger issue than it needs to be. Evan apologizes. He didn't apologize. Well, Robert corrected quickly, he would have, if he thought you'd take it the right way. The right way. As if there was a correct manner in which to accept being dismissed like a household inconvenience. I felt something tighten in my chest, not painful exactly, but sharp in its clarity. For years, I had let Robert decide what mattered and what didn't, what I was allowed to feel, and what should be brushed aside. It was easier than dealing with conflict. Easier than acknowledging the widening gap between us. But age has a way of teaching you that peace built on silence is hardly peace at all. Robert, I said, I need a few days. For what? To think. To think about what? He pressed, surprised and irritated. About how I'm being treated, I answered. He scoffed softly, as if I had said something childish. Mom, don't start imagining things. Yesterday was unfortunate, but you're blowing it out of proportion. Evan didn't mean anything by it. Clara was tired. And I'm not imagining anything, I interrupted gently. I was there. I saw how all of you behaved, and I need time to sit with that. He exhaled sharply, annoyed. Well, I wish you'd told me yesterday. Clara barely slept, worrying you were upset. I almost laughed at that. Clara had looked bored yesterday, not anxious. But I didn't say it. I've never been one to humiliate people with their own lies. Tell her I'm fine, I said. Are you? He challenged. I looked at the cake dome on the counter, the untouched half of what was meant to be a celebration. I will be. He took a long pause, then spoke more softly. Mom, don't be like this. Like what? Overly sensitive. The words landed without heat, but with weight. I'd heard them before, many times. Usually when I'd expressed something Robert didn't want to hear. I'm not being sensitive, I said evenly. I'm being honest. He didn't like that. I could hear the stiffness in his next breath. Fine. If you need time, take it. But don't make this into something it's not. He was telling me what to feel again, telling me how to frame my own hurt so it would fit more comfortably inside his life. Robert, I said softly, I'm not making anything into anything. I simply need space. Another pause. So, you're not coming for Sunday dinner? Funny. After yesterday, he still assumed I'd come running. No, I said. Not this week. He was quiet for several seconds. Then, flatly, well, all right. I guess I'll tell Clara. I'm sure she'll understand. I doubt it, he muttered, too quietly for him to realize I heard. For the first time in years, I felt no urge to defend myself, to smooth things over, to be accommodating. I simply let the silence stretch. Call me when you're ready, he said at last. It didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like an instruction. I will, I lied gently. When I hung up, the house felt quiet again. But not the heavy kind of quiet I'd felt upon waking. This was different. This quiet had space in it. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space where a lifetime of swallowed words and small humiliations could settle long enough for me to look at them clearly. I put the phone down, folded my hands in my lap, and let the stillness gather around me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew this. Something inside me had shifted yesterday, and it wasn't shifting back. I didn't sleep well that night, not from sadness, though there was plenty of that, but from a kind of restless clarity I hadn't felt in years. It was as if something inside me had finally sat up after a long sleep and said, "Enough." When dawn came, pale and quiet, I was already dressed. I made tea, drank half of it, and left the rest cooling on the table. My mind was elsewhere. Somewhere I had avoided going for far too long. The bank. For most of my life, the bank had been a place I visited only out of necessity, to deposit my paycheck when I still worked as a nurse, to withdraw cash before holidays, to sit with my husband, Harold, while he handled the bigger decisions, investments, savings, the mortgage. After he died, the bank became a place I stepped into with the same feeling you get when entering a room you used to share with someone who is gone. Half comfort, half ache. But over the years, the bank had also become something else, a quiet graveyard for my generosity. Every automatic transfer, every scheduled payment, every temporary loan to Robert that had turned permanent. I never questioned any of it. Love doesn't keep ledgers, I used to tell myself. Until yesterday proved how wrong I'd been. The branch was nearly empty when I walked in, just a couple of early customers and the soft smell of printer paper and polished floors. A young woman at the desk looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. How can I help you?" I hesitated for a second. This was the moment where the old version of me, the accommodating one, the one who never wanted to inconvenience anyone, usually took over. But today, she stayed silent. "I'd like to review all ongoing transactions and automatic payments tied to my accounts," I said. "Every single one." She blinked, surprised. "Of course. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, "but I'm willing to wait." I didn't have to wait long. A few minutes later, I was sitting in a private office with Mr. Lambert, a mild-mannered man in his 50s with reading glasses halfway down his nose. He'd helped me before. Always kind, always patient. Today, I appreciated that more than ever. "What would you like to look into, Mrs. Hale?" he asked gently. I folded my hands in my lap. "I'd like a full list of all automatic transfers. And I'd like to discuss canceling them." He raised his eyebrows, not in judgment, but in concern. "All of them?" "Yes," I said. "All." He nodded slowly and began typing. A printer hummed to life, spitting out pages one after another. When he handed the stack to me, it felt heavier than paper should. I started reading. There were payments I remembered, and payments I didn't. Transfers to Robert's mortgage, to Evan's college fund, to the utility bills at their house. Monthly deposits described as support that I didn't recall authorizing, though I must have at some point. Old promises disguised as generosity. And there it was, an automatic $600 deposit every month to Robert's household budget, a line I hadn't noticed in years. Then another, $200 each month labeled miscellaneous assistance, and a third, $150 monthly for transportation costs, which I was fairly certain referred to Clara's car maintenance. I felt heat creep into my cheeks. Not anger exactly, not yet, but shame. Shame that I had let all this happen while telling myself it was harmless kindness. Mr. Lambert cleared his throat gently. "Would you like to cancel specific ones, or all?" I said again, more firmly this time. He studied my face, perhaps trying to determine whether an elderly woman was making a rash decision, but my gaze didn't waver. "All right," he said. "We can suspend them immediately. Permanent cancellation will require your signature on each form." "Print them," I said. He did. It made a small, steady rhythm, paper sliding, ink stamping, pages gathering. It sounded like a clock ticking down to something inevitable. When he passed me the documents to sign, my hand trembled slightly. Not from fear, from the weight of finality. I signed anyway. Each signature felt like reclaiming something I'd lost. Not money, but dignity. Mrs. Hale, Mr. Lambert said gently when I finished. I just want to make sure you're doing this for your own reasons, not because someone pressured you. A faint, humorless smile tugged at my lips. I'm doing it because no one pressured me, ever, not even to consider myself. He nodded. Understood. He filed the forms neatly. It may take a day or two for everything to process, but the transfers will be halted today. I exhaled. My shoulders felt lighter. On my way out, I noticed a young couple in the waiting area, arguing softly over a loan application. The woman looked tired. The man looked frustrated. I thought of Robert and me years ago, me offering help before he ever had to ask. Back then, I'd believed generosity was a language of love. Now I realized it can just as easily become a language of silence. Outside, the autumn wind tugged at my coat. I walked slowly toward the bus stop, feeling the world shift just a little under my feet. It wasn't a triumphant feeling, not yet, but it was steady, solid, a beginning. My phone vibrated in my pocket. A message from Robert lit up the screen. Mom, call me. Evan wants to talk. We need to clear the air. I looked at the words for a long time, the way you look at something that used to matter, and now only echoes. Then I slid the phone back into my coat without replying. The bus arrived, doors opening with a creak. I stepped inside, took a seat by the window, and let the city drift past. As the bank faded behind me, I felt something in my chest loosen, a small, quiet freedom I hadn't known in decades. And for the first time since yesterday, I let myself breathe without swallowing anything bitter. I didn't go home right away after the bank. Something inside me, some old, unused instinct for self-preservation, kept me moving. My feet carried me down Main Street, past the bakery where Harold and I used to sit on Sundays, past the pharmacy where the clerk still knows my blood pressure medication by heart. And then, almost without deciding, I turned toward the law office on the corner. Whitman and Shaw. I'd walked past it 1,000 times, always thinking, one day I should get my papers in order. One day. It's a phrase people my age lean on the way children lean on fences. Not because it holds them up, but because it gives the illusion of support. Today wasn't one day anymore. Today was the day. Inside, the air was warm and smelled faintly of old books and carpet. A receptionist, young, bright-eyed, with a neat braid, looked up with a smile. Good morning. Do you have an appointment? No, I said. But I'd like to speak to an attorney about updating my will. Her expression softened in that way young people sometimes do when they realize you are old and alone. But she didn't pity me, and that small mercy made me grateful. One moment, she said, disappearing through a side door. A few minutes later, she returned. Mr. Shaw can see you now. I followed her down a hallway lined with certificates and photos of charity auctions. I found myself staring briefly at a picture of Mr. Shaw, younger, shaking hands with a police chief. He was older now, of course, in his 60s, with thinning hair and kind, tired eyes. The sort of man who had probably held many hands through difficult decisions. Mrs. Hale, he said, standing politely as I entered. Please, have a seat. What brings you in? There are moments in life when you realize the only way to speak is plainly. So I did. I want to change my will entirely, I said. I want to remove my grandson from it. For a moment, he didn't move. Not out of shock, I think, but out of respect. As if he understood that saying such words cost something. All right, he said gently. Let's talk through it. He asked questions, the kind a good lawyer must ask. Not about gossip or drama, but about intentions, assets, legal concerns. I answered calmly. My voice didn't crack once, though inside, I felt each sentence carve away the last remaining illusions I'd held about my family. When he finished taking notes, he leaned back slightly. Mrs. Hale, decisions like this can be emotionally heavy. Are you certain? I thought of Evan's hand dropping that plate into the trash. The indifference on his face. The absence of a single, "I'm sorry." Then I thought of all the times I'd helped him. His summer camp fees when he was 12, his braces, his laptop for college, the money I'd tucked into his birthday cards even when he barely looked up to thank me. How every time I gave, they took without question, without gratitude. Yes, I said. I'm certain. That's enough for me, he nodded. Let's go over your options. He explained it all patiently. Revocable trusts, beneficiary adjustments, clauses that protect elderly clients from financial manipulation. The words were clinical, but beneath them I felt a quiet current, something like relief. I wasn't punishing anyone. I wasn't being vindictive. I was simply choosing myself for the first time in decades. At one point he paused, tapping his pen lightly. Do you still wish to leave anything to your son? A delicate question. I don't want him to struggle, I said slowly. But I also don't want him to benefit from treating me as an afterthought. He nodded. We can structure it in a way that protects your wishes and prevents misuse. Good, I said. That matters to me. We spent nearly an hour going through details, more details than I thought my mind at 78 could handle. But I listened carefully, the way I used to listen to patients when I worked as a nurse, making sure I missed nothing. When everything was arranged, he gathered the papers neatly. I'll prepare the drafts, he said. You can review and sign them next week. Thank you, I replied, rising slowly. This helps more than you know. As I walked back toward the reception desk, I felt a strange steadiness in my chest, a feeling I hadn't known in years. Maybe resolve, maybe peace, maybe something deeper, something that had been buried under years of being needed, but never cherished. The receptionist smiled warmly as I passed. Take care, Mrs. Hale? Outside, the wind had picked up, scattering leaves across the sidewalk. I pulled my coat tighter around me. My legs ached, but it was the comfortable ache of having walked somewhere important. Halfway home, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Robert. Mom, why aren't you answering? Evan wants to come over tonight. I stopped walking. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen, feeling nothing. Not guilt, not fear, not obligation, just clarity. Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and kept walking. The sky was a soft, heavy gray, the kind that hinted at rain but never quite delivered. I didn't mind it. Gray skies feel honest to me, like they're not pretending to be something they're not. By the time I reached my house, I felt tired in the gentle way that comes from doing what is necessary, not what is expected. I hung my coat, rinsed the teacup I'd left earlier, and sat down in my favorite armchair. The cushions knew the shape of my body better than my own family did. I closed my eyes and let my breathing settle. Today, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The first real step in a very long time. And for the first time since Evan threw that cake into the trash, I didn't feel powerless. I felt free. The house was dim when I returned, and for a moment I stood in the entryway without turning on the lights. There's a certain kind of darkness that doesn't frighten a woman my age. It simply folds around you like a blanket, reminding you of all the evenings you've survived before this one. I slipped off my shoes and walked slowly into the living room, letting my hand glide along the back of Harold's old armchair. The fabric had thinned over the years, soft as memory itself. On the mantel, a row of framed photographs waited for me, patient and unchanged. I reached for the one in the middle, our wedding day. I was 21, breathless with hope, and Harold, tall and steady, looked at me like I was something precious. It startled me sometimes that someone once looked at me that way, that someone loved me without needing anything from me. I carried the photo to my chair and sat down carefully. My knees weren't kind today. The ache had deepened during my walk, settling into the bones the way cold settles into old wood. I placed the picture in my lap and traced the edge of Harold's tuxedo with my thumb. "What would you say now?" I whispered. I imagined him leaning back, arms crossed, eyes gentle but firm. He'd been like that, calm even in storms, steady even when life shook him. He would have hated yesterday, hated seeing me spoken to like a burden instead of a mother. "You always told me to have a backbone," I murmured, "to stop fixing everyone's problems. I suppose I never listened." A faint breeze rattled a window pane, and for a moment, I let myself pretend it was his answer. After he died, the silence in this house grew thick and heavy, the kind that pushes against your ribs. I filled it with other people's needs, Robert's bills, Clara's troubles, Evan's demands, because tending to them was easier than tending to the emptiness Harold left. It made me feel useful, necessary, and when you're old, necessity can feel like love. But now I saw what it had become, a trap disguised as kindness. I set the photo aside and reached for the small wooden box on the coffee table. Inside were letters Harold wrote to me during our first years together, back when he was training and I was working nights at the hospital. I rarely opened them anymore. The tenderness in his handwriting could be overwhelming. But tonight, I lifted one, yellowed at the edges, and unfolded it gently. "Don't let the world make you smaller," he had written. "You have a quiet strength, Maggie. Use it." I felt my throat tighten. Age weakens many things, but it sharpens certain truths. And the truth was this: I had made myself smaller for years, not because anyone forced me, but because love, when unreturned, teaches you to shrink in hope of becoming easier to accept. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the box. My hands trembled only slightly. The room felt warmer now, as if the house approved of what I was doing, of the boundaries I was finally drawing. I realized I wasn't afraid of being alone. I'd been alone for years already, even with family around me. What I feared, quietly and deeply, was wasting whatever time I had left on people who only saw my worth when it paid their bills. Outside, the sun had dipped below the houses across the street, throwing the last line of light onto my carpet. I watched it for a long moment, that thin golden slice before it faded completely. I rose slowly, joints protesting, and set the wedding photograph back on the mantel. "I'll be all right," I whispered, to Harold, to the room, perhaps to myself. "I'm finally learning." Then I turned off the lamp, letting the natural dark settle around me. It felt calm, earned. a darkness without fear, the kind that comes only when a woman has finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. The next morning, I moved slowly, not from sadness this time, but from a kind of thoughtful heaviness. My mind had worked through the night, sifting old memories and new decisions until dawn softened the edges of everything. I brewed tea, opened the curtains, and stood for a moment watching the pale sunlight gather across my yard. The hydrangeas Harold planted decades ago had long since stopped blooming, but their dry stems still stood stubbornly upright. I admired them for that. By mid-morning, I heard a soft knock on my door. Not hurried, not sharp. A gentle, familiar rhythm. I didn't have many friends left, but there was one person who always knocked like that. "Morning, Margaret," said June when I opened the door. She stood there in her quilted jacket, cheeks pink from the cold, her gray hair pinned back with the same little tortoiseshell clip she'd worn since the 90s. We'd lived on the same street for almost 40 years. We were never the kind of friends who spent every day together, but there was a quiet steadiness to our companionship, the kind you only build over decades of small kindnesses. "I brought muffins," she said, holding out a small container. "Blueberry." "You always liked those." I stepped aside to let her in. "You always know what I need before I know it myself." She smiled as she unbuttoned her coat. "Well, I saw Robert's car in your driveway yesterday, and I know how they usually leave you feeling." I didn't answer at first. June didn't push. She walked into the kitchen, placed the muffins on the counter, and poured tea for both of us without asking where anything was. She's known for years. We sat at the table, and for a moment, I just listened to the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft clink of our teacups. Then June reached across and covered my hand with hers. "Tell me," she said simply. I sighed, not dramatically, just with the weight of the truth settling in my chest. "It was my birthday, June." Her face softened. "I know. I meant to stop by, but the weather—" "It's all right," I said quickly. "Really?" But they came over. Robert, Clara, and Evan. June's eyebrows lifted slightly, a silent question. "They didn't bring anything," I continued. "Which doesn't matter, not really. But Evan, he threw the cake out, into the trash, with the plate and fork and everything." I paused. "Right in front of me." June's lips pressed into a firm line. "That boy has been growing too comfortable for years." I swallowed. It wasn't even anger. It was indifference. Complete indifference. "That's worse," she murmured. I nodded. "And then Robert called yesterday. Told me not to make a big deal out of it. Said Evan was frustrated." June scoffed softly. "I raised 3 boys. Frustrated looks nothing like disrespect." I felt something ease in my chest at her words. A small, grateful untying of a knot I'd held too long. "And what did you do?" she asked. "I went to the bank," I said. "Canceled the automatic payments. Then I went to see a lawyer. I'm removing Evan from my will." June sat back slightly, studying me. Not shocked, more proud. "It's about time," she said. "They've bled you dry for years. You've given and never asked for anything in return." "I didn't mind giving," I said softly. "I minded becoming invisible." June's eyes softened. "You're not invisible. Not to the right people." I looked at her for a long moment. She meant it. And I realized how rarely I heard words that weren't wrapped in expectation. We talked quietly for a while, about Harold's old letters, about the hydrangeas that needed pruning, about how age makes everything more tender and more distant all at once. June has always had a way of speaking without judgment, without making advice sound like a command. When she left, she squeezed my arm gently, the way Harold used to when words weren't enough. "You did the right thing," she said at the door. "Don't let them make you doubt it." After she left, the house didn't feel quite as empty. It wasn't full, but it wasn't hollow either. It was the kind of quiet that welcomes you instead of swallowing you. I sat down with a muffin, tore off a soft piece, and let the sweetness sit on my tongue a moment before swallowing. It tasted like reassurance, like someone had seen me, really seen me, and hadn't looked away. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel ashamed of wanting more than what little my family gave. By the next morning, I had almost convinced myself the quiet would last a little longer, that perhaps Robert needed time to cool down, that perhaps Evan would retreat into whatever mattered more to him than birthdays. But peace doesn't linger long when people are used to reaching for you the moment they want something. Around 9, my phone buzzed once, then again, insistently, like a child knocking on a locked door. I didn't pick it up right away. I finished buttering my toast, took a slow bite, and let the butter melt on my tongue. Only after the third buzz in a row did I reach for the phone. The first message was from Evan. "Grandma, I need help. Can you send $300? My card declined. No greeting, no question, just assumption. Another message followed almost immediately. "It's urgent. I can't wait." And then, as if he sensed I hadn't answered quickly enough, "Are you there?" I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering above the keyboard. There was a time when I would have panicked, imagining him stranded, hungry, embarrassed somewhere. A time when my heart would have leapt to soften any blow life might give him. But now all I felt was a hollow weariness, a recognition. Not once did he say please. Not once did he ask how I was. Not once did he acknowledge my last birthday, or the cake he tossed away. This wasn't a cry for help. This was a habit. I didn't reply. A minute later, he sent another message. "Grandma, come on. You always help. Why are you ignoring me now?" Always. Such a revealing word. Not a compliment. An expectation. I set the phone down and pushed my toast away. My appetite had vanished, but not from guilt. From clarity. A clarity so stark and steady that I almost didn't recognize it as mine. A few minutes passed before the phone buzzed again. This time the tone shifted sharply. "I need that money today. Dad said you'd help." I closed my eyes. So Robert was still volunteering me for expenses like a bank he didn't need permission to access. The old me would have sighed, softened, tried to understand. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Evan texted again. "Grandma? Seriously?" Then another. "If you're mad about yesterday, that's ridiculous. It wasn't even a big deal." Not a big deal. The cake I bought with shaky hands, the birthday I spent alone, my dignity, tossed into the trash with a fork on top of it. I slid the phone aside and stood, needing movement. I went to the window, pulled back the curtain, and looked out at the street. The neighborhood was calm. Children walking to school, a man jogging by with his dog, the mail truck turning a corner. Ordinary life, unbothered by the drama of my family. It grounded me. When I returned to the table, the phone buzzed again, this time with a long, angry paragraph. "You can't just ghost me. This is messed up. I need that money, and it's your job to help your family. Dad said you're being difficult for no reason. Your job." I let out a quiet breath, half exhaustion, half astonishment. Somewhere along the line, love had been rewritten into labor. Finally, a shorter message came. Fine. If you want to act childish, whatever. I didn't reply. Around noon, another message arrived. Just 2 words. You owe me. I stared at that one longer than the others. Not because it hurt, but because it finally showed me the truth with perfect, awful clarity. I didn't owe him anything. I had already given him more than he ever thanked me for. I had given years, money, forgiveness, soft landings he never appreciated. And what he threw back at me was entitlement wrapped in resentment. The phone buzzed one last time. I'll just ask Dad. He said you're in one of your moods. One of my moods. I turned the phone face down and folded my hands in my lap. No shaking, no tears, only stillness. The steady, answered quiet of a woman who finally understands the cost of being endlessly available. For the rest of the afternoon, I kept the phone out of reach. The world outside my window moved gently, honestly, while my family spun their familiar patterns somewhere beyond it. And for the first time in years, their noise didn't reach me. Robert showed up that evening without warning. I heard his car before I saw it. The familiar rattle in the engine he kept promising to fix but never did. My heart gave a small, tired thud. Not fear, not even dread. Just the awareness that whatever peace I'd found these last 2 days was about to be tested. The knock came sharp and impatient, not like June's gentle tapping, more like someone claiming a right to enter. I opened the door slowly. Finally, Robert said, brushing past me into the hallway before I could invite him. He smelled faintly of cologne and irritation. His coat was half-zipped, as if he'd left the house in a rush of annoyance. "Hello, Robert," I said quietly, closing the door behind him. He didn't bother with small talk. He turned to me with that familiar look, the one he used when he was a teenager trying to justify something he knew he shouldn't have done. "What's going on with you?" he demanded. "Evan said you ignored all his messages today." "I did," I answered simply. Robert blinked, taken aback by my bluntness. He wasn't used to me handing him the truth without cushioning it. "Why?" he said. "He needed help." "He wanted money," I corrected. "Same thing," Robert snapped. I took a breath, steady and slow. "No, not the same thing." He opened his mouth to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. His shoulders lowered slightly, though not with understanding, more with irritation he hadn't yet shaped into words. "Mom," he began again, using a softer tone, the one he used when he wanted me to bend. "Evan's under a lot of pressure. His internship doesn't pay. He's struggling. You know how expensive everything is these days." "Yes," I said. "I do know." "So why are you suddenly acting like you don't want to help him?" I felt a strange calm wash over me, as if the answer had always been waiting. "Because helping him stopped being helping," I said, and became expected, required, taken for granted. Robert frowned. "That's not fair." "Fair?" I echoed. "He told me I owed him." Robert looked away, jaw tightening. "He didn't mean it. He's a kid. He's 19. Well, he's young. He says things without thinking." "And you?" I asked quietly. "What's your excuse?" His head jerked up. He stared at me, surprised, maybe even offended. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Age teaches a woman that truth spoken softly can hit harder than any shout. "You've been ignoring my calls," he said finally, changing the subject. "You're scaring Clara." "I didn't mean to scare anyone," I said. "I just needed time." "For what?" he asked, frustrated. "To punish Evan? To punish us?" "No," I said. To see things clearly. Robert scoffed. See what clearly? That your family needs you? I shook my head. That my family doesn't see me. He opened his mouth, but no words came. The truth has a way of stealing breath before it offers answers. Robert, I continued, I've spent years giving without asking for anything. I've helped with your mortgage, your bills, Evan's school. I did it because I wanted to. But somewhere along the way, kindness turned into obligation. It was never like that, he protested weakly. It was, I said, and you know it. Silence filled the space between us, thick, uncomfortable. Robert shifted, rubbing a hand over his face. Look, he said finally, if you needed money or help or anything, you could have just told us. A quiet, painful irony. I don't need money, I said. I don't need help. I needed respect. His shoulders stiffened. And yesterday, I added, I realized I haven't had it for a long time. He took a step back, as if the room suddenly felt too small. So what now? You freeze us out? You ignore Evan? You make a big dramatic statement? I shook my head. No, I'm simply making changes. For myself. What kind of changes? He asked, eyes narrowing. I didn't answer. Not yet. He would learn soon enough when the papers were signed. Robert stared at me for a long moment, searching for the version of me he'd always relied on. The one who folded quickly, apologized first, soothed everything over. But she wasn't standing here tonight. Finally, he muttered, I don't like this, Mom. I'm sorry for that, I said honestly. But I'm done living a life that only moves when someone else pushes it. He hesitated at the door, his voice tightening. Evan will be hurt. He hurt me first, I said softly. He just didn't notice. Robert didn't answer. He stepped outside, pulled his coat tighter, and walked to his car without looking back. When the door closed, the quiet returned, different than before. Stronger. Steadier. No longer something that held me captive. I sat down, folded my hands, and let the stillness settle like a truth I'd waited too many years to finally speak. The drafts were ready by Wednesday. Mr. Shaw's office called early in the morning, his receptionist speaking in that gentle, careful tone people use when they think an elderly woman might be overwhelmed. But I wasn't overwhelmed. Not anymore. I thanked her, wrote down the appointment time, and spent the rest of the morning in a quiet, steady stillness. By the afternoon, the sky had dimmed with the kind of gray that brings no rain, only a soft heaviness. I dressed with care, not for anyone else, but because this moment felt like something solemn, almost ceremonial. I wore Harold's old wool scarf, the one he used to throw over my shoulders when I shivered. It felt right to bring a piece of him with me. The law office was warm, smelling faintly of coffee and paper. Mr. Shaw greeted me with a respectful nod. I've prepared everything we discussed, he said. Take your time looking through it. He slid the documents toward me. A stack, but not an overwhelming one. Each page held careful lines and clauses, a new shape for my life after decades of letting others mold it. I put on my glasses and read each line, slowly, deliberately. The removal of Evan's name, the reallocation of assets. The protective clauses ensuring no one could pressure me again. A small portion still left to Robert, conditional, modest, appropriate. And the rest assigned to causes I believed in, written in clean, steady ink. My hands didn't tremble. I felt only a calmness, a certainty that came from someplace deeper than anger or pride. This wasn't revenge. This was correction, balance, truth. When I finished reading, I looked up. It's all exactly as it should be. Mr. Shaw nodded. Then we can sign. He slid the papers to me one by one, pointing to each line. I signed slowly, neatly, knowing full well what each stroke meant. With every signature, I felt something inside me settle, a long-awaited alignment between who I had been and who I could still choose to be. When the final page was done, Mr. Shaw placed it gently in the folder. "Mrs. Hale," he said, "you've taken thoughtful steps today. If you ever need anything, clarifications, updates, you come straight to me." "Thank you," I replied. "I'm not planning to leave this world anytime soon, but it feels good to know I'll leave it on my own terms." He smiled. "That's all any of us can hope for." I stepped outside into the early evening. The air was crisp, almost cleansing. I pulled Harold's scarf closer and began the walk home. My legs were tired, but it was the kind of tired that comes after doing something necessary, something that finally brings you back to yourself. Halfway down Maple Street, a thought rose in me. Not sharp, not triumphant, just steady. For so many years, my worth had been measured in dollars sent, favors done, crises solved. Today, for the first time, I placed my worth in ink on paper, in decisions that protected me instead of draining me. As I approached my house, the lights glowing softly in the windows, I felt no guilt, no fear, only a quiet assurance that my life still belonged to me, and that finally, I was living it that way. The storm didn't come right away. For a brief, peaceful stretch, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, they would sense the shift in me and step carefully. But people rarely adjust their behavior when they've grown accustomed to taking without consequence. And by Saturday morning, the quiet broke. The first messages were from Clara, long ones, too long, as if length could disguise the lack of sincerity. "Margaret, I don't understand why you're being distant. Evan feels awful. You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I read it once, then put the phone face down. Another came minutes later. "Robert said you've been cold. We're worried. Are you eating? Did something happen with your medication?" There it was, the subtle sting of dismissal, dressed up as concern. If a woman of my age is firm, she must be confused. If she draws a boundary, she must be unwell. If she finally stops giving, something must have gone wrong inside her mind. I didn't answer. An hour later, the tone shifted. "I don't think it's fair for you to treat Evan like this. He's a teenager. Teenagers make mistakes. You should reach out." I let the phone buzz on the table while I folded laundry slowly, methodically. It felt good to choose my own pace instead of matching theirs. Then the messages turned sharp. "You've always been dramatic. I told Robert this would happen eventually. We've done so much for you." That last one made me sit down, not in shock, just in quiet disbelief. I tried to think of a time, any time, in the last 20 years when they had taken care of me the way I had taken care of them. Nothing came. By noon, Robert joined in. His tone wasn't gentler, only more rehearsed. "Mom, Clara's upset. Evan feels attacked. You need to talk to us." I set the phone aside and washed the dishes. The warm water soothed my hands. The simple tasks steadied me. Another message popped up. "We heard from the bank that some transfers didn't go through. Did you make a mistake? We need those funds for utilities. Call me back." A mistake? As if I were incapable of intention, as if my choices could only exist in error. I dried my hands and sat at the table, letting the weight of their words pass through me without lodging in my chest. I had spent a lifetime absorbing the moods and needs of others. Now I felt like a stone in a river, still unmoved, letting the current rush by without pulling me under. The next message was shorter, sharper. "Mom, what are you doing?" I didn't answer. Another. "You're being unreasonable." Another. "You're acting out of emotion, not logic." Another. "This is going to cause real problems." I exhaled slowly, the kind of exhale that empties out years. They didn't know yet, not the full extent of the changes, not the will, not the protections, not the final doors quietly closing behind them. But they felt something shifting, and fear was beginning to crawl up their voices. In the late afternoon, I finally silenced the phone completely and stepped outside. The wind was cool, carrying the faint scent of pine. A few leaves scraped along the sidewalk. I wrapped my sweater tighter around my shoulders and let the air steady me. As I stood there, June walked by with her dog. She waved. I waved back. Her presence reminded me that not all relationships in this world are built on taking. When I went back inside, the house felt warm and safe, like a place that belonged entirely to me again. I sat in my armchair, placed the silent phone on the table beside me, and let the calm settle. Let them rage. Let them accuse. Let them scramble to make sense of a world where I no longer revolve around their needs. I had made my decisions quietly, with clarity, not spite. And there is nothing louder to people like them than a woman who has finally stopped explaining herself. Evan came the next day. Not Robert, not Clara. Evan, alone, which already told me exactly what kind of visit this would be. He didn't come to apologize. Boys like him don't walk into a room carrying remorse. They march in carrying expectation. I saw his car pull up from the window, too fast, music thumping. He slammed the door harder than necessary and strode toward the house with the confidence of someone who believes the world will always open for him. The doorbell rang once, sharp. I opened it, but only halfway. "Grandma," he said, pushing lightly as if to widen the gap. I didn't move. He frowned. "Why didn't you answer my messages?" "I didn't feel the need to," I said. He rolled his eyes. "Seriously? This again?" He walked past me without waiting for permission. I let him, because I wanted to see for myself whether there was even a trace of awareness in him. There wasn't. He dropped onto my couch like he owned the place, one leg sprawled over the other, phone in hand. "So," he said, "Dad said you're being weird. He thinks you're mad about the cake." I looked at him quietly. "It wasn't about the cake." "Then what is it about?" he demanded. "You're ignoring everyone." "You blocked the bank transfers. Dad was freaking out yesterday." I sat in my armchair across from him, hands folded loosely. "Your father's finances are not my responsibility." "That's ridiculous," he shot back. "We're family." "I know," I said. "That's why I helped for so long." "Then why stop now?" His voice rose, sharp with adolescent indignation. "You can't just change everything without telling us." "I just did," I said. He blinked, as if trying to compute a sentence spoken in a language he didn't yet speak. "What does that even mean?" "It means," I continued, "that the giving has ended." His lips pressed together, forming a thin, angry line. "You owe us. After everything you've done for—" "No," I interrupted softly. "I don't owe you. I gave because I wanted to, and now I don't want to anymore." Silence. Heavy. Unsettled. Then he laughed, a short, incredulous scoff. "You're overreacting. Dad said you get like this sometimes." "Like what?" I asked. Evan shrugged. Emotional, sensitive, taking things too seriously. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. Do you truly believe throwing someone's birthday cake in the trash is nothing? He hesitated, just for a second. Then, it wasn't that big a deal. It was to me, I said. He threw his hands up. God, why are you making everything about you all of a sudden? Because I had never done it before. Because 78 years of shrinking myself into usefulness was enough. Because love that demands silence isn't love at all. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, Evan, what did you come here for? He shifted, irritated. I need money. My card declined again. Dad said you'd probably help if I talked to you in person. There it was. Not hidden, not softened. The truth. Plain and bare. I'm not giving you money, I said. He stared at me, stunned, as if I'd just told him the sun wouldn't rise tomorrow. Why not? Because you haven't earned it. His face reddened. Earned? I'm your grandson. And I'm your grandmother, I said quietly. Not your bank. He stood abruptly, anger flushing up his neck. This is insane. You're ruining everything for no reason. No, I corrected. I'm correcting what should have ended a long time ago. He shook his head, scoffing. Dad's right. You've changed. Something's off with you. I rose slowly, steady. Evan, it's time for you to go. He stared at me as if expecting the old version of me to return. The soft one, the giving one, the apologizing one. She didn't. Fine, he snapped, snatching his keys. But don't expect me to come back until you get over whatever this is. He walked to the door, loud and careless. Before leaving, he turned once more. You'll regret this. I held his gaze, calm, certain. No, I said. For the first time in my life, I won't. He slammed the door behind him. The house trembled for a moment, then went still again. A stillness that felt earned. A stillness that felt like truth, settling exactly where it was always meant to be. In the days that followed Evan's visit, the house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a long, clenched fist had finally opened its hand. I moved through the rooms more slowly, not because of age this time, but because I was noticing things I'd stopped seeing. The way the afternoon light gathered in soft pools on the carpet. The faint scent of lavender from the sachets June gave me last Christmas. Even the ticking of the kitchen clock felt less urgent, more like a companion than a reminder of time slipping away. For the first time in years, my life wasn't arranged around anyone else's needs. I didn't wait for messages. I didn't brace myself for requests. I didn't watch the clock to make sure I was available for someone who rarely showed up on time. I simply lived. Quietly. Steadily. One morning, I put on my coat and walked down to the small park a few blocks away. I hadn't been there in months. It always felt like a place for younger people, faster people. But that day, I sat on a bench, letting the pale sun warm my face. Children ran past with bright scarves trailing behind them. A couple walked their dog. A teenager tossed breadcrumbs to the birds. None of them needed anything from me. None of them asked for anything. I was just another person in the world again. No role to perform, no expectations weighing on my shoulders. It felt liberating. My knees ached a little by the time I stood, but even the ache felt honest, like a reminder that I was still here, still walking, still choosing where to go. I began reading again. Real reading, not the half-hearted glancing at pages I used to do between phone calls. I pulled old favorites from the shelves, books Harold had read, with tiny pencil marks in the margins. I traced his notes with my fingertip, and felt something warm settle in my chest. Not grief, not quite. More like a gentle companionship, as if his thoughts had lingered in the paper all these years waiting for me to return. June visited often, sometimes with her dog, sometimes with a bowl of soup, sometimes simply to sit across from me and talk about nothing important. That's the gift of long friendships. Nothing needs to be important to matter. We'd sit with our tea, two older women whose wrinkles matched the soft folds of the curtains, whose voices didn't rush, whose silences weren't heavy. "You look lighter," she said one afternoon. "I feel lighter," I replied. And it was true. My days had a new rhythm now, gentle, intentional. I cooked small meals just for myself. I cleaned out drawers that hadn't been opened in years. I listened to the radio in the evenings, humming along to songs from a time when I still danced barefoot in the kitchen with Harold. I even started taking short walks after dinner, wrapped in his old scarf, letting the night air cool my face. The neighbors' houses glowed warmly in the dark, and I imagined all the lives unfolding behind those windows, messy, imperfect, stitched together with love or habit or necessity. It comforted me to know the world went on without my constant worrying. One evening, as I returned from a walk, I paused at my front gate. The house looked small and familiar, the porch light casting a soft circle on the steps. For the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt mine. I realized then how much space my family's demands had taken up in my life, how their needs had crowded out the quiet joys that once shaped my days. Now that noise had faded, and in its place was something I hadn't felt in years: myself. Not the mother, not the grandmother, not the reliable bank account or the emergency contact. Just Margaret, a woman with her own thoughts, her own pace, her own small joys. I closed the gate gently behind me, feeling a calm certainty settle in my bones. I hadn't reclaimed my youth, but I had reclaimed my life. It was almost a week before Robert reached out again. I had expected anger, or perhaps another round of accusations, but instead he sent a brief message. "We need to talk. It's important." That was all. No greeting, no warmth, just importance, the one currency he still believed carried weight with me. I didn't reply right away. I spent the morning trimming the dry hydrangeas along the porch, listening to the brittle crackle of the stems. There's something honest about pruning, removing what no longer grows so the plant can breathe again. It felt fitting. By late afternoon, he arrived. This time he knocked softer, as if unsure of the reception he'd get. When I opened the door, he looked tired in a way I hadn't seen before, tightness around his eyes, a stiffness in the way he held himself. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hello, Robert." He hesitated on the porch before stepping inside, glancing around as if expecting something to be different. But the house was the same. Only I had changed. We sat in the living room, him on the edge of the couch, me in my armchair. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable for me, but clearly heavy for him. He cleared his throat. "I talked to the bank again." I nodded. "I assumed you would. They said the transfers were canceled, all of them." His voice held a note of disbelief, as if generosity should be a permanent membership, revoked only with a committee vote. "Yes," I said calmly. "I canceled them." He looked at me for a long moment, searching my face. "Why now?" I folded my hands. "Because I finally saw what I was allowing." "Allowing?" His voice sharpened, but he caught himself. "Mom, we depended on that money." "I know," I said gently. That was the problem. He exhaled sharply and leaned back. This is going to put us in a difficult position. I nodded again, not unkindly. You're adults. You'll find a way. He ran a hand through his hair, agitated. Evan thinks you hate him. I don't, I said. But I don't owe him what he believes I do. Robert's jaw tightened. He made a mistake. He's young. He's 19, not 5, I said. And it wasn't a mistake. It was a habit. Robert didn't argue, but the flicker in his eyes told me he wanted to. I continued softly. And habits don't break unless something changes. He stared down at his hands, silent. Then, in a quieter voice, Clara's upset too. I'm sure she is, I said. Change is uncomfortable. He looked up at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, the one who used to run to me crying after scraping his knees, the one who wanted comfort more than solutions. Mom, are you sure you're doing the right thing? I let the softness in my voice remain, but not the old uncertainty. Yes, I'm sure. He swallowed, as if that answer hurt in a way he didn't know how to name. And the will? He asked quietly. I met his gaze. I took steps to protect my wishes. His breath caught, not outrage, something closer to fear. A fear rooted not in losing me, but in losing what I provided. You changed it, he said. Yes. And Evan? He is no longer included. The words landed between us with a quiet, undeniable finality. He looked away, staring at the wall as if trying to understand a world where I had boundaries. After a long silence, he spoke again. He's going to be angry. He already is, I said. But he'll survive it. Robert's voice lowered almost to a whisper. And us? I considered him carefully. He wasn't asking whether I still loved them. He was asking about access. Habitual, easy access to my life, my money, my effort. You are my family, I said softly. That hasn't changed. What has changed is what I allow. He nodded slowly, absorbing each word. Not agreeing, just absorbing, the way a man takes in the first cold wind of winter. When he finally stood, he looked older somehow. I'll tell Clara, he said. And Evan. I know, I replied. At the door, he hesitated. Mom, I didn't realize... I stopped him gently. Most people don't realize how much they take until someone stops giving. He lowered his eyes, then nodded, and left without another word. When the door closed, the house felt calm again. Not empty, not wounded. Just mine. And I sat in the dimming light, understanding that sometimes the quiet that follows confrontation isn't loneliness. It's freedom settling into its rightful place. In the weeks that followed, life settled into a gentler rhythm than I'd known in years. Not empty. No. Emptiness is what I had felt when I was surrounded by people who treated me like a utility. This was different. This was space. Room to breathe. Room to become someone I'd forgotten I was allowed to be. My days felt honest. I woke without bracing myself for a message asking for money. I moved through my house without listening for the next request. I gardened. I read. I cooked small meals just for myself and seasoned them exactly the way I liked. It's strange how long a woman can live without asking herself what she likes, only what others prefer. June stopped by often, sometimes with her dog tugging impatiently at the leash. We'd sit on the porch, wrapped in scarves, watching the neighborhood move at its usual pace. She'd talk, I'd listen, and then I'd talk, and she'd listen. Two women finally speaking the truth without softening it for anyone. She never once asked me to justify anything. One afternoon, she brought me a single rose cutting from her garden. Plant it, she said. Something new should grow here. I planted it that same evening, my knees protesting, but my heart feeling curiously young. The soil was cool and soft beneath my fingers, the air sweet with the promise of spring. It struck me then how many years I'd spent tending to everyone else's needs while letting my own ground go fallow. As I stood, brushing dirt from my hands, a sense of quiet pride settled over me. Not righteousness, not triumph. Just the steady knowledge that I had done something difficult and necessary. Something most people wait a lifetime to gather the courage to do. Robert called less. I think he didn't know what to say anymore, now that I no longer played the role he relied on. His messages were shorter, polite in a strained sort of way. He didn't mention money again. He didn't mention the will. Perhaps he understood there was no argument left to make. Perhaps he simply ran out of excuses. Or perhaps, deep down, he was beginning to see me not only as his mother, but as a person. Evan didn't call at all. I wasn't surprised. Entitlement rarely apologizes. It simply withdraws when it finds no door left open. But strangely, their absence didn't wound me. It clarified me. One evening, as I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the street outside glowing gold with the last light of day, I found myself speaking softly into the quiet. "Harold," I said, imagining him there beside me in his old sweater. "I hope you'd be proud." I felt it then. Not an answer, not a voice, but a warmth. A sense of standing, finally, on the solid ground of my own life. I had spent decades giving time, money, energy, forgiveness, patience, giving until the word itself felt worn thin. But in the end, the hardest gift to give was to myself. Permission. Permission to draw a line. Permission to reclaim my dignity. Permission to choose peace over obligation. People think strength looks loud. But at my age, strength is quiet. It's the firmness of a hand that no longer trembles when it says no. It's a door you close gently, not in anger but in understanding. It's a life rebuilt from the inside out. And when I finally rose to turn on the porch light, I realized something almost miraculous. I wasn't lonely. Loneliness is what you feel when you're unseen. But now, I saw myself. If someone hearing my story needs to hear this too, then let me say it plainly. You are allowed to protect your peace. You are allowed to choose yourself, even late in life. You are allowed to stop shrinking to fit the spaces others force you into. And if you're reading this, if my quiet voice has reached yours, then listen just a moment longer. Stories like mine deserve to be heard. If you'd like more, if you want to follow along, to stand with women who finally found their strength, stay with me. Share your thoughts. Let your voice be part of this one. I set my empty cup down, turned off the lamp, and let the soft darkness settle over the room. For the first time in years, it felt like home,